In 1926, the poet Langston Hughes wrote, "We younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If white people are pleased, we are glad. If they're not, it doesn't matter. We know we are beautiful and ugly too. If colored people are pleased, we are glad. If they're not, their displeasure doesn't matter either. We build our temples for tomorrow, strong as we know how, and we stand on top of the mountain, free within ourselves." The Harlem Renaissance and Transatlantic Modernism is an exhibition that explores the creative explosion that took place within the African American community in the new Black cities that were taking shape in the 1920s through the 1940s. This was the early period of the Great Migration, a mass population movement, when millions of African Americans migrated from the segregated rural South to the new Black cities that took shape in New York, the neighborhood Harlem, as well as South Side Chicago and other cities nationwide. First and foremost, it was the first African American-led movement of modern art, where we had Black artists who were making modern portrayals of the modern Black subject, shaping a new set of images that they felt should define the African American experience. The Harlem Renaissance is a term that came to define the movement after the movement was over. At the time, many of the artists themselves, and certainly the writers, referred to the movement as the New Negro movement. And it is this movement, together with the very important jazz aesthetic that emerged, and a number of artists, performers. So this was an interdisciplinary movement combining art, literature, and music. And what we're trying to do with the exhibition is present a range of works in painting, sculpture, photography, works on paper, with the objective of repositioning the Harlem Renaissance as central to American art during this pre-World War II period, as well as international modernism. The movement was marginalized and to some extent erased as those histories were taking shape. This exhibition is the first survey in an art museum in New York City, for example, in almost 40 years. It is an opportunity for the Met to help center the Harlem Renaissance within the histories of American art and international modern art. The show begins with a small gallery that we've titled The Thinkers. It's important, I think, to realize that the Harlem Renaissance was based on a set of ideas that were articulated by writers who were often friends with the artist. And one of the most important of those writers was Alain Locke. And he published a book in 1925, The New Negro, which gave the Harlem Renaissance the title that it was known by during the period itself. He also urged the new Negro artists to be international, to engage with international modernism. So this was a founding philosopher of the Harlem Renaissance movement. Across the gallery is a portrait of Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes was possibly the best known of the writers of the period. He was central to the idea of developing a radically new mode of Black self-expression. Another wonderful portrait depicts another prominent writer, Zora Neale Hurston. It is a portrait by Aaron Douglas. Zora Neale Hurston really wanted to retain a sense of
the folk culture, what she called the common run of us, the everyday person, and to not shy away from or be embarrassed by, but instead to embrace the entire suite of the Black population as being essential to the formation of Black modernity. And then we have a portrait by one of the few woman artists who was at the center of the new Negro movement, Laura Wheeler Waring. And she is depicting James Weldon Johnson, who was a writer, a composer, an activist, and the author of Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is generally regarded as the African American national anthem. You have those four thinkers as kind of a framing context for the show. These are all just giants of history.
I wanted to have a gallery that just kind of opens up as an explosion of imagery, showing the various artistic portrayals of everyday life in the new Black cities. While the movement emanated from Harlem, it was not specific to New York. Artists came from Philadelphia, from Chicago, from Oakland, California, and from many cities in between. We are just really pleased to have this painting, Street Life Harlem, by William H. Johnson, as a focal point of this exhibition. It depicts a stylishly dressed couple on a street in Harlem, getting together before they head out for a night of entertainment, possibly in a cafe, a bar, one of the dance clubs like the Savoy Ballroom. The self-confidence of cosmopolitan African Americans, free and independent, presenting themselves in a manner that is of their choosing, representing values that emerge from the African American community itself. We see an expressive treatment of the figures. It calls on the aesthetics of African mask, the flattened, stylized features of the face, as well as the juxtapositions of vivid colors. He's not attempting to make a portrait of specific individuals. He's portraying icons of a set of ideas, of an approach to style and self-presentation.
But it shouldn't be seen as a representation of universal values. There was a range of values, a range of approaches to sartorial self-styling within the Black community at this time.
James Van Der Zee was the leading photographer of the Harlem Renaissance, making literally thousands of photographs for decades, beginning in the 1920s, that just capture everything that was happening during the Harlem Renaissance and for decades after. And this photograph here is just an iconic Van Der Zee photo. We see this stylish, elegantly dressed young Black couple in full-length fur coats. And they're posed on a street of elegant Harlem townhouses, getting out of their very new car. This was a limited edition Cadillac V16. And so what he's capturing is the emergence of an urbane, economically affluent middle class in the new Black cities like Harlem. And this type of imagery simply was not seen in American popular culture until this particular moment. This is a couple that is fully in control of their own image. Van Der Zee made one of the most extensive records of the Black middle and upper classes. And so he's showing every other aspect of this community life as well. We see street processionals, the various social clubs, uniformed soldiers, and we go into the residences, people from across the social stratum. So the entire sweep of Harlem life was James Van Der Zee's subject.
As we look at the portraits in the exhibition, I think we can see very clearly a visual representation of the aesthetic debates that really informed and shaped the movement, what this new mode of self-expression could look like. And there was this philosophical discussion between Alain Locke and W.E.B. Du Bois that underlies many of the works of art that we will see in this exhibition. Alain Locke urged the new Negro artist to engage with the avant-garde European or Western aesthetics and the aesthetics of African sculpture. Whereas W.E.B. Du Bois is venerated for his very early articulation in his book, The Souls of Black Folk, of a definition of the African American psyche as a double consciousness, this sense of observing oneself, reflecting on how do I present myself to the world, but always being aware of the external gaze, specifically from white Americans. As a result, there was a sense that the elegant naturalism of academic painting could convey dignity and gravitas. So we had these two competing stylistic approaches.
We have here a portrait by Archibald Motley of Edna Powell Gale, who was Motley's gallerist in Chicago. And he portrays her as an elegant sophisticate, stylish, shown in a graceful interior with a vase of flowers, her sartorial, her dress, the height of fashion during the period. Powell Gale was emblematic of Black success, economic success, and he portrays her in the tradition of academic painting. Naturalistic proportions of the body, carefully molded face. And in comparison, we have another seated woman by William H. Johnson. Here we see him making a portrait that is an emblematic portrait. We see the exaggerated proportions of the figure, the focus on the hand and on the mask-like flatness of the face, broad expanses of bright, bold colors. So he's pulling in ideas from German Expressionism, from Fauvism, African mask aesthetics, but deploying those ideas to depict the modern African American subject. So Johnson is one of the artists who most fluently worked with the ideas that were advocated by Locke. Even though they were working in very different styles, their shared objective was to portray the modern Black subject, a body of representation that had not existed in art history before. This is a juxtaposition that we see throughout the galleries. So even artists who were drawing from academic tradition were also engaged with the symbolism, the ideas, and the aesthetics that the artists who were working more directly with the avant-garde deployed. We dedicated an entire gallery to Aaron Douglas, who is the indisputable leading painter during the Harlem Renaissance of African American history. From the legacy of ancestral Africa to the present moment of the life unfolding during the Great Migration. And we are just incredibly honored to have this monumentally scaled mural from a series of murals that he made in the 1930s from the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And this particular mural, Aspects of Negro Life, is the title of the entire series. And this is the second of those paintings depicting events from the moment that the Emancipation Proclamation is read until the beginning of Reconstruction.
In the center of the painting, we see the various responses to that, the elation, the dancing, But we also see on the far left side the departure of the soldiers of the Union Army and the arrival on horseback of the Ku Klux Klan. So we see representations of the kinds of issues that unfolded in the 50 years or so after emancipation, the terrorism of lynching, legalized segregation, and the aspiration to find a better life. So this leader is pointing to the city on the hill, which is the cities outside the South that were the destination of the Great Migration. And then we have another monumentally scaled, a larger-than-life portrait of the African-American opera singer Marian Anderson by Laura Wheeler Waring, one of the few women artists at the center of the movement. This painting, which is about 7 feet in height, was commissioned for an exhibition that took place at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, together with other portraits of African-American luminaries. Laura Wheeler Waring is using the conventions of academic classicism to convey dignity and historical gravitas that Marian Anderson absolutely commanded in this moment. As much as the New Negro movement emanated from Harlem nationwide, it was also absolutely an international movement. Many of the New Negro artists spent extended periods of time living and working in Europe, often due to the constraints of legalized racial segregation in the United States. And during their time in Europe, they formed cross-cultural affinities and exchanges with their modernist peers in Europe and across the Atlantic world.
And so here we have a gallery where we recombine 4 of the paintings that Archibald Motley made during his time in Paris. He spent the year 1929 there. And this painting in particular, Blues, I think is just a wonderful representation of the Black European presence in modernist artistic circles. The title is a misnomer. It refers to blues, but it is in fact a dance club frequented by Black French customers from the French Caribbean as well as from West Africa. And so they would be dancing to French Caribbean music, the meringue.
This cosmopolitan aspect of artistic production, I think, is exemplified by Motley and by the work of Black and white European modernists. So we have here this small but powerful painting by Henri Matisse, Aïcha and Laurette. Aïcha Goblet was a very well-known artist model of Martiniquez heritage who posed for several Matisse paintings. And so what's interesting about Aïcha and Laurette is that Matisse is moving beyond a very standardized mode of European artistic representation of the Black woman, which almost always was a scene in which the Black woman was the servant or the maid, and the white woman was the employer, the boss, socially superior. So here we see his famous Italian model, Laurette, together with Aïcha in a pose that implies there is no social hierarchy here. So I think this is emblematic of this transatlantic engagement by modern artists with the representation of the multiracial aspect of their respective societies.
We've committed an entire gallery to the subject of nightlife as it unfolded in the big cities of New York and Chicago and in other cities in between. And we show scenes dance clubs where the visitors, the customers are dancing. It's the African American community presenting itself as they saw themselves, regardless of external points of view or values. So you see with the jazz aesthetic an enthusiasm for creative dancing, for improvisation. You see the vivid colors of the attire of nightlife, sweeping street scenes. So this very vibrant, lively, energetic lifestyle is what we're trying to capture in the nightlife section.
There are works that take a very close look, that actually confront some of the issues that shaped modern family life in Black communities, as well as the wider society. You have tensions between the classes that are captured in portrayals of multiracial families, where the ability to pass or not can be very influential. These issues were part of an effort to show aspiration, but to also mount a critique of some of the attitudes within the community that needed to evolve and become more fully modern. Artists were activists in the movement to protest social injustice, economic exploitation, and racism. So in the concluding gallery of the exhibition, we show photographs by Van der Zee and by others, often unnamed, that depict early mass demonstrations, mass marches by the NAACP along Fifth Avenue here in 1917 to protest race riots and other social injustice like lynching. In this case, to protest a very specifically horrific lynching of a pregnant Black woman. A mob visited her home, kidnapped her, took her to a location where they cut her unborn baby out of her stomach, and then she was murdered as well. So this is the type of terrorism, torture, murder that was still routine. These things happened at least 16 times a year in this period of the mid-1920s at the height of the new Negro movement. There were very important race riots in 1919 and 1921 in Tulsa, in New York City, and so forth. And so we see William H. Johnson here depicting several aspects of the aftermath of a race riot in New York City. So much of the emergence of Black modernity, the intellectual, cultural, and civic engagement that took place in these new Black cities that was characteristic of the new Negro movement can be seen as a precondition for the unfolding of the civil rights movement in the American South that began in the 1950s.
Having concluded the new Negro period in the late 1940s, we wanted to convey the enduring legacy of the period. And we fortunately have this magnificent collage, The Block by Romare Bearden, made in 1970 and acquired by the Met very soon after. And this is a monumentally scaled series of 6 different collages that depict a specific block in Harlem where Bearden had his early studio. And we see the scenes playing out on the streets, as well as the peeks at private life that we get through the windows. We see how the Harlem Renaissance was the beginning of the representation of modern Black life and culture. And in this way, we can feel we have a sense of the enduring legacy of the movement for artists like Bearden that also extends to living artists today.